The Healthcare Security Cast is sponsored by 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit www.3dnetworktechnology.com. And by Genetec. Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's GENETEC.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Wednesday, July the 1st. On this special Canada Day edition, we're joined by Canadian healthcare security leader Don MacAlister. We discuss the evolution of healthcare security throughout his career, taking a look at the past and looking towards the future as well. Now, let's get right into the show. Today on the Healthcare Security Cast, we're joined by Don MacAlister. Don, thanks for taking the time today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much, Brian.
Excellent. Now, I always like to start off by learning a little bit about the guest. So for those who may not know, who is Don MacAlister?
43 years in the security business now, as you could tell from the white hair on your screen. I'm an immigrant. I moved from Scotland with my family when I was 9 years old and settled in the Vancouver area. And I'm a dad, father of two great grown daughters. Been married to a wonderful woman, Heather, for the last 36 years as well. How she tolerates me from time to time, I'm not sure, but I'm lucky that she does. It certainly helped shape my career for sure. I'm trying to take up a new hobby in golf because I used to play ball and played soccer when I was younger, but as we age, those sports become a little too much for us. So I'm finding golf a real challenge, to be honest with you, Brian. But it's I'm looking for a challenge, so I think this is certainly going to be it. There's no question about it. I'm also working for Paladin and Pal American Security as the senior advisor for those companies. So and remain very active in the security industry.
You're not alone in finding golf to be challenging, Don.
Well, I've played with quite a few IHSS members, and I think more of us find it a challenge than are good at it.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing I'm best at is finding my ball when I lose it, but I definitely go through a lot.
I'm very similar. I think my best shot is probably finding the ball in the woods and knocking it out. I'm actually getting quite good at that.
Awesome. Now, you talked a little bit about what you're doing now as the senior advisor for Paladin. Can you just walk us through your career path and kind of tell us what got you to this point?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, like a lot of people in from my generation, I kind of fell into security. It really wasn't considered a profession back in the 70s when I started. So in the late 70s, I started working with the Correctional Service of Canada in maximum security prisons here in BC. Spent 4 years working in that very secure environment, kind of learning the trade at the highest level, if you like, as a very young man. And then spent 8 years in campus security at the University of BC, which was quite different, much more open, and really focusing on kind of a learning student-centric environment, which helped shape some different skills for me. But in the late 80s, there was a hospital, the UBC campus, UBC Hospital, when I was working there. And they were hiring for a security coordinator. And I saw this as a real sort of opportunity. At the time, I didn't know a lot about healthcare security, but something about it enticed me. And I went to healthcare in I guess, 1989 at UBC, and I've never looked back. I call it kind of getting the bug. Something bites you, and you get this sense of purpose and this love for healthcare, and then learn how to apply the skills and the expertise that you have as a healthcare security professional, into that environment. And then, so for me, that's when I really sort of came alive in terms of a career. It didn't feel like work, jumping out of bed every day, don't need a snooze button, doesn't matter what time it is, it's the evening, it's the weekend, something's going on. you want to be involved, because there's a real sort of commitment to the purpose of healthcare security, which is helping to make people safe. And those folks that are in hospital are so vulnerable. They're your neighbors, they're your family. We've all used the health system ourselves, and it's a very easy purpose to connect with, and that's driven me for the rest of my career. I'm so fortunate to have found that at that point in my career when I was really trying to figure out what was I going to do with my life and with my career. And so I stuck to it and became increasingly responsible positions within the health authorities. Started looking after 3 hospitals, and then I had 5, and then 12, and then running emergency management and parking and security for huge group corporate entities that each brought their own challenge. And learning the culture of each hospital, learning how things get done within each health system. It was very, very exciting without ever losing that kind of sense of purpose of why healthcare security is important. And I retired when I turned 55 in 2011, when I was executive director for all of the Lower Mainland hospitals in Vancouver area. So I had about 25 hospitals and over 300 community facilities within my scope, and just a tremendous team, professionals, healthcare security professionals to work with, that made it a joy to come to work every day, and I loved it. And so one of the hardest decisions of my life came to leave the public sector, and arguably one of the best corporate healthcare security jobs in Canada, to come to the private sector and learn new skills and have a chance to broaden what I learned and what I believe in from a healthcare security philosophy across the country through my work with Paladin, and our CEO Ashley Cooper, who basically said, keep doing what you're doing in the public sector and help make the industry better. And so that's really been a labor of love for me this last 9 years as well in the private sector.
Awesome. And it's funny, the one thing that you said that kind of stuck out for me was, it just makes me think everybody was a novice at some point, because it's hard to believe that there was a time when you didn't know anything about healthcare security.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. It's the first time I worked in a hospital. On day shift, we didn't have any security staff, and it really wasn't that unusual in those days that hospitals didn't have security. Many hospitals across the country didn't have any security staff. And so on day shift, I was the only security person on, and I was the security coordinator wearing a blazer and dress pants. But if there was a call, a missing patient, a code in emerge, or, whatever the case may be, someone needed their door unlocked, for their office, I was the person running around doing it. And so I really kind of learned healthcare security and how to apply it in a healthcare environment as a frontline person. And that really helped me as I grew, connect with the folks at the different levels of the organization and the work that we're doing, and being credible and being legitimate about valuing what it is that those folks do for us, every day, every night, in hospitals and other healthcare facilities across North America.
Awesome. Now, thinking back to that as the younger Don MacAlister in the blazer on that day shift, who were some of the people that you looked to early on? Who were some of your mentors that helped you kind of shape who you are and learn that healthcare environment?
Yeah, well, I had a boss. He didn't work in healthcare long, but he had a great influence on me. His name was Ken Wilson, and he said that I didn't have enough confidence. That my confidence in his mind didn't match the skill set that he saw, and so he put me in situations where I was challenged to succeed, to give me some of that confidence. And I'll never forget him for that. It's 30 something years ago. I still see him from time to time. He had a big influence on me. At the same time, there's another fellow in Vancouver Island called John Hill, who was one of the founders, co-founders, with a group of us, of the IHSS British Columbia chapter in 1995. And John was ahead of his time. He had 2 big hospitals that he was responsible for at a time where that was unheard of, somebody be responsible for one site. He also had created an incident reporting system, kind of homemade, if you like, where they're able to track key activities between his 2 sites. And this fascinated me. I still have this fascination with data and metrics. And he was doing this, in the 1980s. And I know there are some, progressive U.S. leaders who were probably doing that even before that. But, for us in Canada, that was a big deal. So he was really sort of inspirational to me as well. And then once I joined IHSS and once I get increasingly responsible positions, I've just had a string of amazing mentors that that were probably too exhaustive to list. If I take a kick at it, I'm sure I'll forget someone, but maybe I'll be just a little broad on that. I always remember the folks in Boston from my first one of my first IHSS meetings in 1996, I think it was. And you've got folks like Bonnie Michaelman and John Driscoll and Connie Packard and Jack Connolly, and in later years, Kevin Toohey, who had a tremendous influence on my career. But those folks made me feel welcome right away into IHSS, made me feel like they valued my contributions, that Canada was doing some great things in healthcare security as well, and really made me feel valued, opened their doors, let me see their programs, and that there are many, many other folks, but I'll always remember that group as being really, really sort of quick to embrace the notion that Canadians were pretty good at healthcare security as well, and that was always a big deal for me. One as you probably know, I did about 10 years working on the Guidelines Council for IHSS, and some of my most enjoyable times. The person who started the Guidelines Council, Russ Calling, some people call it the godfather of healthcare security, one of the founding members of IHSS in 1968, and he also took an interest in me. He wanted a Canadian member on the guidelines. He wanted an international perspective on how these guidelines were written and the audience that they would land on. And he was very kind to me, very nurturing. I learned a lot. I learned a great deal as well from Russ Calling. I thought he was just an amazing man. And I saw him at the IHSS 50-year anniversary in Chicago, and it was just so terrific to see him again as well. So it was, I've got a long list of folks. I guess two other mentions, if I can. One is that the importance of having clinical mentors. And when I go back to the late 1980s and working at UBC Hospital, some of the folks that I gravitated to, some of the folks that took time to help me understand healthcare, they were vice presidents, they were directors of nursing, and I've managed to maintain those relationships through all these years and grow new ones with all of the hospitals that I've worked at over the years. And so some of my best friends are clinicians. Some of them now are CEOs or COOs or VPs or directors or even frontline nurses. And those folks really helped me understand what healthcare is. And that was important for me, because to me, to be really good at what we do, to be really effective as healthcare security professionals, we need to understand healthcare first. And a lot of times we think we understand healthcare, but if we don't understand it from the clinician's perspective, from the patient experience perspective, we really can't build an effective security program, in my mind, because we're trying to fit a security program into an environment we don't understand. And to me, that's a really critical piece that's often overlooked. So clinicians, too many to mention, have been great mentors of mine. And then finally, two who have become friends and colleagues, Tom Smith and Tony York, who I think are, arguably among the best healthcare security professionals in the world. I've been blessed by having them as colleagues and friends for the last 15 years. I've learned so much from both of them. They challenge me. They challenge some of the programs that I've developed. They share openly some of the successes they've had and some of the challenges they've had. And again, the great thing about this industry is that people get close. They build relationships that can often last a lifetime. And for Tom and Tony, certainly that's the case.
Excellent. Yeah, you mentioned so many people there that kind of stand out for me.
Yeah.
Number one, you mentioned that whole Boston chapter, and I want to say,
Yeah.
I appreciate the Boston chapter a lot. Outside of Ontario, they're the biggest, I guess, consumers of this podcast. They listen to it quite a bit. So thank you, Boston. I want to make sure to highlight that.
Well, you should have told me that in advance, Brian. I probably would have said even more good things about them.
No, yeah, there's no shortage of good things to say about the Boston chapter for sure.
Oh, that's for sure. And again, I feel badly that there've been folks across North America who have really sort of influenced me as well. And one that comes to mind as well, just as a closing on this question, is the late Tim Portali out of Nashville, the Hospital Corporation of America. And I worked for a few years with him on guidelines. I got to know him. We've hosted him here in Vancouver. I've been to Nashville to see him, and he was just such a big thinker. He really wasn't a healthcare security person. He was about risk and metrics and the big picture. And he asked tough questions in such a informal way that he and I became friends as well. And the industry misses him, and I know his team at HCA and Kat and Bree and Kevin Cleveland miss him deeply, as do we all. But I would have been remiss if I didn't mention the impact that Tim had on me as well.
Yeah, he definitely had an impact on a lot of people. And like you said, it's really hard to remember everybody. I got asked this question the other day, and I went on for a lot longer than you did. And I know I still missed people. I thought of it afterwards.
I could go on a lot longer too, Brian, and it's, but I just, I think that's what popped into my mind when you asked the question, is that we all have influencers. I think that's the other thing to think about is we're being influenced every day, and we're influencing every day, and I think it's incumbent on us to take a role in coaching and mentoring, the next group of professionals that are coming up fast and furious. And there's a tremendous amount of talent out there, tremendous amount of talent. So I've been blessed with folks who have taken an interest in my career, and I try to give back as much as I can in that area as well.
Excellent. And actually the one person that you mentioned as well, Tony York,
right?
I actually remember meeting both of you at the same time. It was the first ACNE I attended when you guys were doing the book signing for the 6th edition.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which is one of my most treasured possessions. I have that on the bookshelf behind me here. But
that's great.
That first one, I actually wore it out because I used that one to study for my CHPA. So you guys were kind enough to sign the second copy that I purchased again. So I appreciate that.
Well, you're very welcome. I know I love going to people's offices and visiting them and seeing the book there. And I like it even more when it looks a little worn and tattered or has Post-it notes, all throughout it. But it's great that it's brought such value to the industry. And I was really pleased to work with Tony, and we were already very good colleagues and friends, and the opportunity to collaborate with him on that book. I think I would say that what did I learn from the experience would be, I learned that I still had a lot more to learn about healthcare security. It took us about a year and a half. It was a real kind of labor of love. Tony and I have very different writing styles. He's much less formal, and much more descriptive, and I'm more technical. And so there was kind of a blend of styles that was interesting. And, the methodology we used, we divided the chapters in half and introduced some new chapters, split them up and said, here's what we're writing. And we kind of had a 1 a month schedule where at the end of each month, I would send him what I'd written. He would send me what he had written. I'd edit, he'd edit. They'd come back. We'd both agree on the edits, and that would get tucked away, and we moved through it that way. And I learned about you learn to develop thick skin when someone you respect says, that piece doesn't really work. I think we need to fix that. I think we need to take that out. I think you're missing this key piece. I think we need to add it. I would say that's one of the real successes of the Guidelines Council as well, Brian, is that ability of, some real type A personalities and some of the bigger names in healthcare security working together on a guideline, is that you need to be thick-skinned enough to say, this can be changed and made better through the input of others. And that was really something that I learned from working with Tony, that the importance of discipline. We had to be on schedule. We had to be open-minded. Also the importance of research. I mean, we wrote that book in 2015, I guess, and that's when we finished it. And, there's a lot of research involved, because one of the things we wanted to do with that latest edition was kind of broaden the audience, even though, the majority of healthcare security professionals in IHSS are American. We wanted to use it as a tool that could potentially bring in other members from the international community. And so we use a lot of examples from the news from, Vietnam, or from India, or from England, or from, Australia, where, there are many more similarities and differences in the way healthcare security operates in other countries, but we thought using cogent examples from other countries. And if you look at the two editions, between the newest edition and the previous, you'll see a lot more international flavor. And that was really a concerted effort on our part, on Tony and I, is to make it more to make it appeal more to folks from other countries. So we really worked hard at that. The one little story I'll tell you as an aside on the book is that I went to Tony's home. He lives in Colorado, in the foothills of the Rockies, to finish the book, for the final push, if you like, for 3 days. And his wife and kids were away, so Tony had the house and his dogs to ourselves. And I hadn't even realized this after writing a book with him for a year and a half. But we have very different ways in which we like the environment set up to write. So I like it nice and quiet. My window here where I can look out at nature and just peace and quiet to let me concentrate. Tony likes loud, booming rock music. So he's got his earphones on and he's in another room and things are booming. And it's like, two completely different styles. And we had a few laughs about that as well. Got the book finished. Went down to there's a very little village just nearby. Went down to the local tavern there, had a beer and celebrated finishing that book together. So it was a tremendous experience. I'm glad it's brought value to the industry. And I just feel so good about that. I got a lot of people ask me about that, and a lot of people ask me to sign copies, and delighted to do that anytime. I'm just glad it brings value, and I even use it myself.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent resource. And yeah, it's funny now, like speaking to you and Tony both about it, learning some of the insights on how it came together to be what it is today. It's brilliantly done the way you guys brought that whole global element into it. And it's just funny to see that, like, the difference in your styles and how you're able to blend it together. It's really impressive. It's really impressive.
Oh, thanks, Brian. That means a lot. Yeah, we put a lot of work into it. And as I say, when you put a lot of work into something, you want to see it having some utility and some value. And I think the industry's gotten good value for it. So thank you for those kind comments.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the other things too you mentioned was about the guidelines. Now, with my role on the board, I have the privilege right now of being the board liaison for the Guidelines Council, and I know exactly what you mean. It's a really, really smart group. For me, it's a little bit different experience than you. I don't have a problem taking criticism from any of those folks because these are people who I've looked up to in a lot of cases, just coming up in the industry myself.
Right.
But I think the challenge for me has been sometimes making suggestions to change something that they've done.
Yeah.
It's
yeah. I think it's a great point, and I think people are sometimes hesitant to do that. When the Guidelines Council sends out, produce a new guideline, they send it out to members for input. We get surprisingly little input. And I think sometimes because people are, either afraid or intimidated and say, "Well, it's produced by this big group. What do I know?" And the answer really is, what you know is a lot, because a lot of times, a voice that takes us down a different track that the group didn't get on, or turns on a light switch that we weren't able to as a group for whatever reason, makes it better. And that group loves getting great feedback that changes pieces of their guideline. They love that. That makes it all worthwhile. So they are a great group. I worked with them for 10 years. I was lucky to work with them that long. I think they've got guidelines in place now in the board bylaws that prevent someone like me from hanging out there for 10 years these days. But I'm sure glad that I did, because I learned a ton and was surrounded by some of the very best healthcare security minds that there are. It was like going to university to learn to be a healthcare security leader, working with all those folks. It really was.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a great learning environment. Especially for someone who hasn't been in the industry as long as yourself, right? Like there's things that you can pick up as well, but
yeah,
for me, it's a really rewarding opportunity to get to work with a lot of these folks.
Well, it's like you're immersed in that world for that time, right?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Now, I want to ask you a little bit too about some of the writing that you've done, and actually just some of the things that you've been recognized for, because you have been recognized for your writing. Just with all the accolades that you've received, what's the thing that you're most proud of, if you can pick one thing?
Yeah, I think as we get older, we start to think back on our careers, and I guess one of the things I would say is as human beings, we spend a lot of time focusing on our mistakes and what we could have done better. And I think that's important and we need to do that. But I sometimes think we don't take enough time to sort of look at accomplishments and what we've done well and what we were part of that went well, and I think that's really important. And I learned that along the way as well. It's just sort of it's a human emotion that it's just easier to gravitate to to what went wrong than what went right. But I think, as you asked the question, writing the guidelines, of course, was really, really important to me. There were some in there that I fought harder for than others, to be the lead writer or to have fewer changes. Your passions come to the forefront, and we all have them. And so I really enjoyed that piece. The book we've talked about already, which is really something that I'm very proud of. I think I'm also very proud of helping to develop um, leaders in our industry, in the security industry, in the healthcare security industry. And again, as I think about it, I think about the team that I had when I was at Fraser Health in the public sector. And a lot of those folks are very well known in the healthcare security industry. When I think about Dave Brown, John Acorn, Greg Conlon, Chris Curry, worked with Jeff Young, and the more recent times, Andrew Pattison and Tom Taggart, and those are two great young leaders. And I like to think that I had some played a part in helping those folks develop in their careers, and that makes me feel really good, because those folks are great security leaders. Not all of them in healthcare still, but a lot of them still are. And that's the next wave of folks that are going to continue to professionalize this industry. So nothing's really more important to me than taking time to develop folks that want to be developed, which is a really important piece as well. So that comes to mind right away. I think as I if you pinned me down and say pick one accomplishment, which you didn't, you're very kind and open on your question, but I think I take a lot of pride in having impacted on the philosophy that we use in healthcare security, in Canada in particular, when we're dealing with aggression. I think that for me, um, I go back to when I told you about the why healthcare means so much to me, the purpose, understanding healthcare. And when I think about how we manage aggression, I think about selecting the right people to be in the healthcare security industry, training them properly, and supporting them. And those folks, without exception, need to understand healthcare, need to understand that when patients become aggressive, that they're still patients, need to be able to separate an enforcement mentality from a service and a caring mentality. And they need to be able to if I go to any hospital and I say to a security officer, why are you here? Like, why do we need security in a hospital? And they can't say something like, if I do my job really, really well, people are going to get good quality care here. If they can't associate what they do with that, then they likely shouldn't be working in healthcare. And so I worked very hard early in my career, training in nonviolent crisis intervention, teaching people, working with clinicians, uh, helping to make sure we had the right type of security people in the hospitals that I was responsible for. And when I went to Paladin in 2011, there was a shared philosophy. It was one of the reasons that I went there, is that, Ashley Cooper, our CEO, I've been doing healthcare for, 25 years before I got there, shared that same philosophy and wanted to take that philosophy and spread it across the country where we could influence it. And for me, that was a real impetus for me to actually move from the public sector to the private sector. And so, if you pin me down, that's what I would say I'm most proud of, is that the way security conducts themselves in a hospital makes me proud. And folks get why they're there. And while there's some enforcement required, and they need to be able to do that piece and do it well, there's also care and empathy required. And they need to do that every minute of every day that they're there. And I think that's what I feel good about. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, I want to actually circle back and talk to you a little bit more about IHSS. Now, we touched on some of the things you did with the guidelines.
Right.
I know you've been pretty involved with the association throughout your career. What
Right.
are some of the highlights for you being involved with IHSS? And what would you recommend? What would you say to anybody who's considering becoming a member?
The I'll start with the last question first. Is I would say you get back much more than you give as a volunteer with IHSS. Um, my career was shaped around my involvement in IHSS to a large degree. The people I met, the practices that I learned, the ability to continuously improve and take that back to my own organization. My career was shaped by my involvement, and I have a pretty traditional kind of career trajectory as it relates to IHSS. Um, Co-founder of the BC chapter in '95, as a member in '94. Did the chapter officers, chapter chair, was regional chair, was elected to the board. My two presidents for my 2-year term were Tom Smith and Tony York. So that's where we kind of met and got to know each other on the board. And then the 10 years on the Guidelines Council. So I've had, I've had uh, pretty much followed the path that I think a lot of board members have followed to facilitate their own personal growth and to support the industry. And I think those pieces are really really important. I think I got my CHPA in 2006. I remember that in San Jose. It took me a while to get to it, and not nearly as long as it took me to get my BA in criminal justice, which took me 21 years of plugging away at a course here and a course there over time, having a full-time job as a healthcare security director. And so 21 years it took me to get my BA. So I was a little quicker with the CHPA, but I'm very proud of the certification and strongly recommend it for all members. It's become the gold standard that organizations are increasingly looking for um, across all countries. So it's been it exposures you to the best practices and the best people in the industry. You're not going to get that anywhere else. And yeah, IHSS has been very good to me, and I think I would love to see people volunteering. I would say don't be afraid. It feels like a risk, and find the time. I hear that a lot. Is I don't have the time. I'm so busy at work. You hear that a lot. How you do it? I'm so busy. Find the time. Build it in. Right. I mean, you can do it. You just need to make it important, to make it a priority, and find the time. You'll get much more, as I said, out of it than you'll ever give to it.
And it's funny, you echo the same sentiments almost word for word as Tony York and Lisa Terry. So basically the same thing. You get
Yeah,
much more than, no matter how much you put in, you get much more out of it.
there's no question about it. And you're right. I mean, but I think it's human nature. You think my day is full. You look at your calendar and it's full, and you've got a family and you've got, all your other commitments. But it's you're investing in your own career, and you're investing in your family, and you're investing in yourself, and it's really I can't say enough about my experience with IHSS. I'm eternally grateful.
Excellent. Now, we've spent a lot of time reflecting. I want to kind of look to the future. Now, in light of everything that's been happening with this pandemic, one of the things that have kind of come up is some of the underlying concerns that we have in these long-term care facilities.
Yes.
What do you think is going to change moving forward, just with the information we've been able to learn?
Well, there've been some absolutely horrific stories coming out of long-term care related to COVID. Stories of death and neglect and abuse and family separation, loneliness for the residents, and I think it's brought a focus to long-term care societally that we've not had before. And I think that historically we've not, as an industry, healthcare security industry, really looked that closely at long-term care as needing our expertise, our attention, our resources, and so on. probably about 5 years ago, I started to really focus on long-term care, and some folks that know me well tease me that as I got older, I suddenly had an inordinate interest in long-term care. But in fact, I sort of saw it as a new frontier or a next frontier for the healthcare security industry. Not to cram our made for acute care solutions into the long-term care environment, but to apply our understanding of care in an environment that we're still to learn. And so I remember presenting in Myrtle Beach about 5 years ago on long-term care at a regional IHSS event, and there wasn't a lot of interest. I think people were looking at each other like, because, what's this? Why long-term care? But I think if we look at long-term care and we see what's occurring there, as the baby boomers start to hit, that age where they're going to need care, as dementia increases across the world, it comes with it a number of risks that we also see in acute care. We've got resident elopement, some horrific stories I know that I've been involved in locally here, where residents left the facility and came to harm. We've also got resident-on-resident violence. Again, some horrific cases there. Resident staff violence. There are all sorts of issues: patient abuse, theft from patients, theft from residents. There's just so many that bear some similarity to the acute sector. I think where the challenge really lies, though, is the folks who are in long-term care. They live there. That's their home. They're residents. And they use terms like, in an acute care setting, you'd say the nursing unit. Whereas in long-term care, they use terms like neighborhood. They live in this neighborhood. And so it's so important that we get to understand that environment. Going back to my initial statements around understanding the environment, it's so important that we get to understand the distinctions between long-term care and acute care as a healthcare security professional, so that when we design solutions, we design them so that they fit in an environment that we understand. Because residents need to have freedom. They need to engage in activities. They need to be able to move freely. So as we see challenges with COVID, like, the spread of disease is rapid because some of the homes are old and you've got 4 folks in a room, and you've got staff working between facilities sometimes that could bring COVID from one facility to another. When you look at how we design an environment for long-term care from a security perspective, we can build in some of those mitigating measures in design. Just this week, or last week, I guess now, Brian, IHSS released the new design guidelines, 3rd edition. And one of them is on long-term care. Now, this was written and published before COVID, but many of the pieces there still apply. We talk about separation. We talk about high-risk residents. We talk about secure units. We talk about access control and visitor control. All of these elements are key to designing a secure but freely accessible for the residents setting. And so IHSS was, I think, pretty clairvoyant in producing long-term care, because that's a brand new guideline, and it's one that I really cared about, and I had took a lead role in writing it with another group of experts. I would refer people to that and make sure they understand and can see the distinction between designing a secure long-term care environment and an acute care environment. Because if you look at design guidelines, you'll see the two. I also think that increasingly long-term care facilities are going to want on-site security, and increasingly going to want security technology like we see in acute care. I think those pieces are already coming into play in some long-term care facilities. I would say when I started in healthcare, there were almost no long-term care facilities that had any security. And as I said at the time, many acute care facilities that didn't have security. Now, almost every hospital, regardless of size, has some security presence. And increasingly, we're seeing security presence being needed in long-term care. So I call that the next great frontier for the healthcare security industry, because I think folks with expertise need to apply that expertise in that setting to create secure environments for an increasingly growing population of residents. And the other thing is that, that the new group are, we've got this sort of notion of what long-term care or nursing homes are like. But increasingly, as baby boomers hit the system, we're seeing younger and stronger individuals that maybe have dementia, as an example, who are being housed in these as their residents in these homes, and mixing with the elderly and the frail and so on. So there are some real challenges that I think we've got the brain power in the healthcare security industry to really impact positively on that and really make a change. And I think COVID has just shone a light on that, for certainly for me, and I hopefully for the industry.
Absolutely. Now, one of the other things too that may see a change in the near future, obviously a lot of our facilities are now leveraging 24/7 visitor policies.
Right.
In light of this pandemic, obviously we've had to shift and really limit access. Do you foresee any changes moving forward to access control and visitor management practices?
Yeah, I think this is an opportunity for the healthcare security industry. I would say that in Canada, we've been a little slower than the US to adopt visitor controls. If you go to, I'll pick a place, if you go to Boston Children's Hospital, for example, in the middle of the day, when you walk in there, you're funneled to a desk where they're screening you, they're giving a temporary ID, and then they're authenticating you to go and conduct your business. Most hospitals, certainly in Canada, don't do that. And my guess is most hospitals in the US are not at that point either. Um, what I think is that executives, again, will have been enlightened to the fact that you can restrict access to a facility for an extended period if you need to. So that gives them some confidence on that front. But I think on the other hand, we need to understand healthcare enough to know the importance of 24/7 access to patients by their families and their significant others, and the positive impact that can have on their care. So the challenge for us really is that balance. We need to be heard to recognize and support 24/7 visiting, in my mind. But on the heels of this restricted access, or really no access in a lot of cases, we need to be able to put some measures in place that give us some control over the visitors who attend the facilities. So I think there's an opportunity here for us to seize. And as they begin to open up, to put some measures in place. In some cases, it may only be, after hours, or, 8 hours a day or 16 hours a day. In some big, busy urban inner city hospitals, it may be 24 hours a day. So again, the challenges for us is A, on design, how are we going to do that without impinging on the 24/7 visiting, which we support, and then B, on the timing, because again, these executives are used to having their hospitals locked up for the last, 3 months. And as they open up, can we help open them up with controls that we've probably always wanted, but not had an opportunity to really sell in a way that the executives would buy in. A lot of times people see it in conflict, 24/7 access control, when in fact, done right, it's really what you want in the hospital. So I think there's an opportunity here, kind of, we'll call it seize the day. Yeah.
Sounds good. Now, just by virtue of the length of your career, I'm sure you've undoubtedly been witness to many changes throughout the industry.
Yeah.
Now, could you share some of your insights just on the evolution of the healthcare security industry, and where do you see it evolving to in the future?
Yeah. Well, it's, I would say when I started, we were just moving out of kind of the night watchman era where, security were night watchmen. They come on at night to make sure the doors were locked, and maybe respond to a fire, or something. And then, as I recall, when I came to healthcare in '89, fire safety was the big piece, because not all buildings were sprinklered. So again, you had patients at risk, vulnerable populations. So your fire safety procedures had to be in place, had to be practiced. You had to have a lot of confidence in them that you could evacuate horizontally, a group of non-ambulatory patients. And, that was a huge focus. Still a focus in healthcare, but the risk is reduced or mitigated a little by the requirement for sprinklers in facilities. So then the focus shifted to asset protection, because if you think, I'm giving away my age here, but before cell phones and before computers, and we didn't have that. When computers came, A, they were like gold, and B, they were expensive as heck. So thieves used to steal them. So then the focus went from keep your eye on the ball with the fire safety, but please, you got to protect these valuable assets and medical equipment and everything else as prices increase. So then in the last maybe 15 years, Brian, the focus has become on healthcare violence and on managing aggressive behavior, so that, again, if you ask people what's the primary purpose of having security in healthcare now, they would likely say, to create a safe environment to make people safe and manage that aggressive behavior in a safe and therapeutic and empathetic manner. So that's really the sort of evolution that I've seen, and that the healthcare violence piece that just permeates every part of the organization. And it's really important that we're seen as leaders in that. And again, that the methods that we use to support the safe control of aggressive behavior need to be defensible, need to be supportive of the mission of the organization, and need to understand that the vast majority of folks who are aggressive in the healthcare environment are our patients. And so that's really been the evolution in my mind, which means you need a different kind of security officer. If you think about it, the night watchman is different from the person who knows a lot about fire safety, who's different from the asset protection person, who's different from the person who engages with clinicians, patients, and their families, to affect the safe resolution of the conflict. And so as the business of healthcare security has evolved, what we need from our security officers has also evolved. And I think what we have now largely is a group of professionals who understand their role, and it's incumbent on us to give them the training and the tools to help them succeed. So that's been a real big sort of change for me. The other piece is, where are we going? I think that a couple things. Metrics and data have become increasingly big. I learned a lot. I was always interested in it, going back to my story of when I came to healthcare. But you got folks like the late Tim Pertally or Jeff Young or Tony York and the Data Warehouse Project for IHSS that are really sort of driving standardization and measurement and really good, solid, defensible metrics. And I think that's really, really important for our industry to be able to create business processes that are supported by metrics. And we've not been very good at that for a very, very long time. We've not. Support services like housekeeping, food, laundry even, they have better metrics than we've had in security historically, and there's really, now the people that run healthcare security programs need to have good business minds. They need to be business people. They need to connect to the business of care. They need to understand the strategy of the organization. Their strategic plans need to align with the strategies of the organization. They need to be at all levels of the organization. From a safety and risk perspective, they need to align. And I think that's really where we're headed as an industry, is this model of the security programs being a sort of critical adjunct of the whole corporate organization. And it's incumbent on us as leaders to prepare for that, to be educated ourselves, to be credentialed, to be current, and to really, really understand the business of healthcare, and to really, really understand your organization's vision and mission, so that you don't end up sort of being a security expert who crams security or forces it into a healthcare organization, as opposed to it fits like a glove because you understand the organization, you understand the business of caring for patients, and what you build and what you create fits neatly into that. And that's so important. And I think there's lots of organizations already doing that well, but I think we all need to do it well. And I think that's the next evolution, to go back to your question, when I started, security was kind of kept in the basements of hospitals. They'd find space in the basement or in the steam tunnels or the, and they'd give you furniture that other people had thrown out. So you had mismatched chairs and right. I mean, I'm
So
sure,
true.
and I'm sure the listeners probably are chuckling. Some of them have been around a long time too. But I always say we've gone from the basements to the boardrooms, and now we're in the corporate boardrooms of big organizations because what we do is important, and because we're able to demonstrate value for what we do and what our programs deliver to support the safe care of patients. And I think that's the path we're headed on.
Awesome. Now, you covered a lot of things. Obviously, you've had a full career, and I don't want to say you've taken a step back or slowed down, because it doesn't really necessarily seem like you have. But
Thanks, Brian. The white hairs maybe saying a little different.
now, given given the change in your career, what can we expect from Don MacAlister? What are you working on? What can we expect in the near future?
Well, I just finished contributing as a member of the task force on the IHSS design guidelines, as I said, which were just released, and very proud of the role that I played with other subject matter experts on that, and proud to be a part of it. I think you're right that probably I will be slowing down my involvement in IHSS for sure. I think it's important that we refresh talent and make room for what's an abundance of young healthcare security professionals coming up now, and it's just a thrill to see that, because there weren't many of us that did what we did 30 years ago. And so I think I am kind of starting to make a space for that. I think what you'll see is more kind of behind the scenes working with our own organizations, Paladin and Pal American, as we grow our business in the US, supporting our executives, supporting key clients, and supporting our staff. So I may not be as visible, as I have been in the last couple of decades, but there's no question that I'm still active and still working and still very supportive of the healthcare security industry.
Excellent. Now, is there anything I haven't asked you yet that you'd like to discuss?
I mean, we covered a lot of topics, and I tend
We
to
did.
ramble as you know. So hopefully what I've said resonates with some folks. I think that I've been blessed to work with people who have helped shape my career, people that worked with me or worked in other organizations and shared practices with me and their expertise with me without hesitation. I just think as a takeaway, that's good for all of us to think about. I've not run across many people in my career who say, no, this is mine, you can't see it, or but whenever they can share something that's not confidential, from my experience, they do. I've always taken that tact, and I just think that's the spirit that needs to punctuate how we go forward together.
All right. And do you have a closing message for the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Well, these podcasts are amazing, Brian. So congratulations to you for taking the industry in a whole different directions and making us think about innovation and creativity and technology, and coupled with the COVID and the the quarantining we're all experiencing. It's just really kind of taken us to a different place. So I just think that I'm in awe of where we're going as an industry. I'm in awe of the talent that is drawn to the industry now. It's a destination occupation now, instead of what am I going to do? I guess I could try this. I think people seek it out, and I'm just proud to be part of it. And and so thanks to all of you that do what you do, because it's just been an amazing 30+ year ride already, and so many colleagues, so many learnings, so many friends. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. And just in closing, the last question I have: how can we connect with you?
Well, probably the best bet is the through email, I guess. So it's because Don MacAlister is impossible to spell for anybody. So it's Don Mac at paladinsecurity.com. So PALADIN security, all one word, .com. I love talking to folks about the industry, and if I can share any ideas or thoughts or learn from you, please don't hesitate, reach out. Thank you.
Thank you again, Don. I always appreciate the conversations with you, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brian. I'm really, really pleased to have the opportunity to sit down and chat with you. Thank you.
And this concludes another episode of the Healthcare Security Cast. Thank you for joining us for this special Canada Day edition. And for my American friends, I haven't forgotten about you. Our next guest is going to be Ben Scaglione, and he'll be talking about the future of healthcare security, just in time for your July 4th long weekend. And as always, I just want to encourage you to engage with us on social media. We do have our group pages on Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as our company pages on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you're having difficulty finding any of these, visit my website, Brine, that's BRINE, Hamilton.com. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay safe and take care.